Oh, when it's red, it's on.
Yes, and
Okay.
then on, and this
You're
red light
on.
comes on,
Yep.
it's on.
Let me read the agenda.
Hi, Grace. Good.
Good afternoon. I'd like to call the Planning Commission meeting to order, please. Can I ask all members of the public to silence their cell phones, and if you need a conversation, to take it outdoors, please? Thank you very much.
Excuse me, if we could have members of the audience please sit down and be quiet as we start the meeting. Thank you.
Can I have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Donenfeld.
Present.
Gardner. Hirschbein.
Present.
Hudson.
Present.
Song.
Present.
Vice Chair Maruzzi.
Here.
And Chair Woods.
Present.
7 members present. We have a quorum.
Thank you. Can we have a staff report on the posting of the agenda, Mr.?
Mr. Chair, the agenda was posted on Thursday, January the 17th. This meeting has been noticed and posted in accordance with state law.
Thank you. Can we have a motion to approve the agenda? Commissioners? Can we have a second to approve the agenda?
I'll second.
Please vote.
Beth, come up first, I think.
Okay, the agenda is approved. The next course of business is the public comments. This time period has been set aside for members of the public to address the Planning Commission on the consent calendar, non-public hearing items, and items of general interest when the subject matter of the jurisdiction, which is under the subject matter of the jurisdiction. If you wish to speak on these items, please come forward at this time. If they are non-public hearing items, the public hearing items, you can also speak during the public hearing item itself. Thank you. Is there anyone wishing to speak?
Yes, I'm the only one. I will try to speak quickly because I can't stay, and I have 3 items I just want to touch quickly. My name is Paul Henriksen, resident of Palm Springs. Item 2D, it looks like the turbines are going to keep their iconic look, so we're in favor of it. That's a nice thing. So glad to see that. Density, 2E. It seems odd to me that in a small city in the middle of the desert with lots of land around us that we're talking about increased density in different places in the city, and I just thought that that was a little odd because it seems unnecessary and unwarranted, but we'll leave it to your best discretion. Now for item 4A, that's the Chalk project, which is also in our neighborhood. I'm from Upper West Side, and we think the concept and everything is they've done a great job with all of that. Our concern still remains with National Historic Registered Wexler steel frame homes and how it will impact that, including with an increased density on that property as well. The other issue is what will happen with parking. In the neighborhood, we already have, adjacent to this project, some other multi-unit dwellings that already produce a parking issue in the neighborhood, and we believe that this one will create even more of that, and that's one of our big concerns. So if you'll please take note of that and think about how that can be mitigated or avoided. I know this project was raised from 53 units up to 60, even though it stated that they could have possibly gone further with that. Just that extra increase of 7 more properties that are 7 more units with 2 cars per unit, that's another 14 cars. We estimate probably there will be 30 to 40 cars that won't be able to fit in the allowable parking. That's the guesstimate that our neighborhood is taking, and we certainly see that being the case around the other multi-unit dwellings. So those are some of the concerns that we're seeing. Those are concerns that I have, and certainly those Wexler steel frame homes, the view cast, meaning the background and the impact to those, because they're part of what attracts people to be visitors here in Palm Springs, to come visit for architectural tours. It's a significant part of our tourism dollars. It's an important component and part of our identity that makes us a place like no other rather than a place like every other. Thank you.
Thank you. If there's anyone here to speak on the Community Housing Opportunities Corporation project, item number 4A, this would be the time to come forward and speak.
Good afternoon, Planning Commission, Commissioner, Chair. My name is Vincent Nicholas. I'm Vice President Real Estate Development for Community Housing Opportunities Corporation. And we're item 4A. I brought my development team. Our team is delighted to be here. We would like to answer any questions when questions are asked of us. We're here to present anything that the Commission would need to hear. I appreciate the comments that were just made. We have addressed through our historical review report is the Wexler homes, so hopefully planning can add to that. So there is a report in our submission. I thank you, and when our item comes up, if you have any other questions, I can answer them at that time, or our team. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Joy Silver, and I'm reading from Greg Lucas Rodriguez. My name is Greg Rodriguez. That you know isn't true, but I am speaking for him. I am a resident of Palm Springs. I'm writing this letter in support of the affordable housing project being proposed by CHOC at the corner of San Rafael and Indian Canyon. There should be no need to debate for affordable housing, not only in the city of Palm Springs, but the entire Coachella Valley. I actually serve on the board of Lift to Rise, a local collective impact collaborative that is addressing our affordable housing crisis in the Valley. It is estimated that just to reduce rent burden by 30% over the next 10 years, we would need to build at least 1,000 units per year. I am also the public policy advisor for Riverside County Supervisor Manuel Perez, where my main responsibilities include housing and homelessness. Homelessness is the #1 issue for voters in the city, and we will never be able to significantly reduce homelessness without more affordable housing stock. Supervisor Perez has been fully briefed on this project and is 100% in favor of its development. I have met with the developer and can honestly say this is one of the best projects I have seen. They have taken into account every prior issue brought forward by the community against any development on this site. The height and view restrictions have been completely addressed, and the design is completely in character with the neighborhood and the city. It is imperative that Palm Springs takes a lead on advancing affordable housing projects such as this. It is a real shame that the workers we rely on for our hospitality and tourism industry, our teachers, and our low to middle income residents are being priced out of the area they work in. Since the developer is operating under SB 35, they really don't have to present to the Planning Commission, but I think by coming before you today, they are showing exactly the kind of developer's good intentions we look for. I strongly encourage you to recommend approval of this development to the City Council. I appreciate your consideration. Greg Rodriguez. As Joy Silver, I agree with Greg.
Thank you, Ms. Silver.
Hi, I'm Eileen Stern. I am a resident of Palm Springs, and I'm speaking on behalf of the affordable housing. I want to speak from the heart, from a personal experience. I grew up in Chicago. My family lived in public housing. I came from a working class family, and when my parents got divorced and I was raised by a single mother, we were able to live in pretty low income housing. I think I understand very well the needs, and I know that in our city, too many people just don't have the opportunity to work here, to live here. And I think we really should move forward in helping those individuals. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Kelly Musan. Thank you so much for hearing me today. I'm a resident of Palm Springs. I'm addressing you about the affordable housing project as well. California is a leader in our nation, but we are a leader in our nation in our poverty rates. 19% of Californians live without the security of knowing when their next meal is going to be, or possibly even roofs over their heads. It is time for us as a community to continue our leadership into curbing this problem. Despite our best efforts in California, we have only decreased our poverty rates 1.4% since 2017. This is in large part due to the high price of housing. People are in crisis. All Americans, Californians, and Palm Springsians deserve the dignity of a roof over their head and a place to call home for their family so that they can thrive, and so too can our community. Moreover, this will help to curb homelessness and bring down the greater safety and security and bring greater safety and security to our community as a whole. The design is beautiful, it's well thought out, and it's a good start to finally providing the housing too many people and too many families need. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Thank you, Commissioners. I appreciate the chance to speak in front of you. My name is Tom Kuhn. I'm a resident of Palm Springs, and I've lived here 20 months. I've owned since '03. And the reason I chose Palm Springs is because of the values that this progressive city has. For us to turn our backs now on affordable housing does not make sense. We've been a leader. We have stepped up and we have added a lot of housing in the Coachella Valley. But one of the areas that really is lacking right now is Palm Springs. I work with the homeless. I sit on the board of the Well. I do not represent the Well today, but I represent their interests at the same time. We need to curb homelessness. We have 135 residents that live on the streets 24 hours a day here in Palm Springs. We just served 1,500 meals at Christmas to people that had nowhere else to go. Some of these were working class individuals, but did not have the money to be able to give that kind of dinner and gifts to their children at Christmas. Now's the time to take the lead. Now's the time to step up and build the housing we need so that we can serve our residents. We don't just need to serve the elite and the high income individuals that want to move into this area, but we also have to serve all of our residents, all of the people, including the poor. So please consider this as a start to what we need to do in this community. Thank you.
Thank you. I see another speaker coming up.
Good afternoon. My name is Nikki Stone, and I've been a resident of Palm Springs since 1988, long time. I am speaking on behalf of the affordable housing and am totally in support of it. Having worked at Desert Regional Hospital for 20 years, I'm now retired. Many of the employees could not afford to live anywhere near the hospital, as you know, and which often caused a problem of during the day of employment. If they lived up at Yucca and it snowed, they couldn't get in. And there was an awful lot of talk then of affordable housing and how many of them would have been happy to come here and to live in Palm Springs. So I am totally in support. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Stone. Is there anyone else in the audience wishing to speak on any of the items on the agenda at this point?
Hi, my name's Joe Wallace. I am the CEO of the Coachella Valley Economic Partnership, and I'm one of the letters that was written in support of the Affordable Housing Project. And looking at it from an economic perspective, you know, we manage the innovation hubs, and we bring entrepreneurs to town. And, you know, you read in the paper about people who have made all of these millions of dollars as entrepreneurs. They don't start out that way. They start out struggling, living on credit cards, doing things like that. And affordable housing is vital to the lifeblood of a growing entrepreneurial community. And I believe that some of the people who we attract to town, who start businesses, may be eligible for affordable housing. And if it's available to them, that's something that will make them start and grow their businesses here as opposed to somewhere else. So something to think about is my opinion, and it's also CVEP supports affordable housing because affordable housing is economic development. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Wallace. I see some other people have come in the audience. Is there anyone to speak on any items on the agenda? Hearing none, I'll move on. Before I move on, I want to acknowledge and welcome our two new commissioners. We have Maria Song, who comes to us from the AAC, and we have Grace Gardner, who's brand new to the commission. This is their first meeting today, so congratulations. The next item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes from January 9th, 2019. Do I have a motion? And is there a second? Maria, can you push your button? There's a vote button there. Oh, okay. Abstaining. There should be an abstain button. Okay, thank you. It passes. We'll move on to the public hearings. The first public hearing, item number 2A on your agenda, is Canyon Partners LLC representing the Museum of Ancient Wonders for a conditional use permit to allow a museum within the Central Business District located at 441 South Palm Canyon Drive. The zone is the Central Business District, Section 10. With that, can we have a staff report, please?
Thank you, Chair. This application is for a museum located at 441 South Palm Canyon Drive. The slide that's before you shows the site. There are two buildings that are next to each other at 447 and 441. The museum is proposed to go into the one building on the right-hand side, which used to be the Marquee Dance and Music location. So when you look at this photograph, you'll see that there's a breezeway that separates the two buildings that goes into a joint parking facility. And in this slide, it shows the starred building is the proposed 441, and then the 447 is to the lower end of the slide with the parking to the rear. So the proposal is to locate within the 6,480 square foot building. Of that building, 2,900 square feet will be used as public space. The handout that is before you today includes a more detailed floor plan than what was included in the original staff report. And you'll see there's some breakdown, greater breakdown of what is public space, office space, storage space, and then a greater description of the type of exhibits that will be inside the museum. So the museum consists of several exhibits that include some Egyptian art, some Indian artifacts, and other museum pieces that the nonprofit organization has curated over the years. So for the details of the project, there currently is 55 off-street parking spaces in the rear of the building, which includes 441 and 447. And they will be, there currently are joint easements that allow cross parking over each of these spaces. So when the applicant gave us the greater detail of the usable space, the downtown parking combining zone will only require 9 spaces within the parking lot associated with the museum. So the site is amply parked for the proposed use. There is proposed hour of operation to be 7 days a week from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. and then on Thursdays extended hours from 12 p.m. till 8 p.m. The museum is also available for private events, and there's an admission fee for adults, children, students, and alike. So within your packet, there are conditions of approval that the Planning Commission would need to make to approve a conditional use permit, which are so noted. Staff is recommending approval, and there was one other letter from one of the tribes, which is included in your packet, And that concludes my report, Chair, and the applicant is here.
Thank you. Are there any questions of staff? Commissioner Donnenfeld.
As I read the supplemental material from the applicant, it looks as though the artifacts being displayed in the proposed museum are not originals. They're all, am I correct, are they all replicas? They talk about them being replicated by artisans of the pharaonic village in Giza, Egypt.
I would have to defer to the applicant to answer that question.
Okay, I'll wait till his presentation.
Commissioner Hirschbein.
Thank you. Thanks for the report. I have a question. Have you looked at the occupant load that would be allowed to use the building at any one time?
The fire department is requiring that the applicant fire sprinkle the building. So an occupancy will be established as to how many could possibly be in the location. I think in the new information that they gave us, let me get to it. He gives us some total occupants of 98.
98, okay. Thanks for that. Maybe I didn't see it, but if you could just point me in the right direction on your report. No, that's okay. I'll take that back. I'm done. Thanks.
Commissioner Hudson.
Is there a second level to this building, a second floor?
There is a second level. It's not being used by the applicant, is my understanding.
Okay, is it the entire footprint of the building?
It is the entire first floor.
So there is a full second floor of the building?
I don't think there's a full second floor. No, they're shaking their heads no.
Applicant is saying no. Okay, well, maybe I'll ask him when he comes up. Thank you.
Any other questions of staff at this point? Okay, is the applicant in the audience? Can I have you step forward and give us your name and your address? You're going to have 10 minutes to make a presentation, and then after public comment, if you so desire, you'll have 2 minutes for a rebuttal.
Excellent, thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Alberto Acosta, and I thank you for this opportunity to appear before you. I'm the founder and president and curator of the International Museum Institute, which is a traveling exhibition firm with a rich inventory of replicated archaeological treasures representing ancient civilizations of Egypt, Greece, and Africa, along with a grand collection of laboratory cast fossil specimens of important paleontological discoveries gathered from 30 museums, natural history museums worldwide. The Institute's primary mission is to provide fully curated exhibitions of universal interest to communities that would otherwise not have access, to enhance educational curricula for local and surrounding school districts, and to provide tourist incentive. These exhibitions have been hosted by museums of science and technology, natural history, children's museums, discovery centers, science, history, and fine art museums, as well as university campuses and community colleges throughout the United States. They are a premier educational, cultural, and economic engine in each of their host cities while they are on display. A past venue list of 50 museums is available for your review by visiting the Institute's webpage, www.internationalmuseuminstitute.com. Feasibility and demographic studies to determine which city in America would be best suited for the retirement of these collections for permanent display have identified a wide scope of candidates. From Syracuse, New York to El Paso, Texas, including Detroit, Michigan, and St. Louis, Missouri, to mention just a few. Palm Springs is the first choice for a permanent location. Not only because of the spirit of all-inclusiveness that Palm Springs is famous for, but to contribute a full-scale and diverse museum collection where it will serve as a window into the worlds of ancient civilization and prehistoric life, a museum of ancient wonders. The nature and scope of a museum with this focus does not exist anywhere in the Coachella Valley. My purpose is to fill this gap, continue to attain important acquisitions to sustain the core of the collections, and in the next 3 to 5 years, manifest a permanent structure as a legacy for future generations. 441 South Palm Canyon Drive, owned by Canyon Partners LLC, is an ideal location to inaugurate the establishment of the museum, and as you may know, resides in the same block as the Museum of Architecture and Design Center, creating, in essence, a museum row with the Art Museum in close proximity. It has ample parking spaces with a public parking garage within walking distance. A front and rear door, double entrance and exit with handicap access are available whenever the museum is open to the public. Both male and female restrooms are conveniently located for visitor comfort. A well-preserved 1960s mid-century era building with high ceilings, a lobby, spacious grand galleries. This building shows pride of ownership. It is in excellent condition and does not require any renovation whatsoever to house and present these exhibitions to the public. Painting the lobby and the galleries are the only augmentation necessary to begin installations. Crowd control is very important to the general operations of any museum, to secure and protect exhibitions from damage or theft, and to assure a pleasant experience for the visitor. In your packet, our draftsman has produced a scale drawing suggesting a maximum number of visitors to be 98, based on the square footage of exhibitions and access to them. This will help to determine which building code conditions may apply. In conclusion, I hope you are in a position to approve this conditional use permit and that the fire department is satisfied with the maximum attendance estimate to preclude any conditions. The museum is prepared to open its doors within 30 to 40 days of your approval. I would like to give special thanks to Glenn Malaker for his expertise and guidance through this process. He is an asset to our city. I look forward to your responses and to assist in your deliberations. Thank you for your time, interest, and kind consideration.
Thank you. Thank you very much. This is a public hearing, so if there's anyone in the audience wishing to speak on this item, could you come forward to the podium, please? Since there appears to be no one in the audience, you have 2 minutes for rebuttal if you want to use it. If not, we'll take questions from the commission.
I would like to answer Commissioner Hirschbein's questions about them being replicas. Of course, I'm sorry, Commissioner. The originals are housed in the museums that house originals. The International Museum Institute has commissioned replicas from artisans who had access to the originals. So they are of the highest quality replica available for museum quality exhibitions. The fossils are laboratory cast specimens. They are direct imprints from original fossils. You could study them as though they were the originals. They're just not as old. So for communities that don't have access to original materials, this is the next best thing without them ever having to leave their backyard.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the commission? Commissioner Hirschman.
Thank you for the presentation. It was very helpful. I have a question. There's a prominent window on the south side of the entrance. I was wondering how you planned on handling that once the museum is open.
There are several ways we can handle that. I'm looking at budget at the moment, but immediately a screen that will block out any direct light into the building. There's a proposal perhaps to build a wall about 18 inches from that building, from the window, to create an exhibition area for people to see before they enter. My main goal is to cut out all the natural lighting to the building, so it is essential for the preservation of the artifacts to make sure that there's no direct sunlight or ultraviolet radiation coming through that.
So the second
front
proposal would, you would see, for lack of a better word, a display facing the public right-of-way.
Mm-hmm.
Just as a comment, that'd be my preference, but thank you for clarifying that.
My pleasure. That's one of my preferences as well.
Commissioner Song, did you have a question?
Mr. Acosta, thank you for your presentation. I have 4 questions, starting with the sort of the finances to ensure that this will be a viable contribution to the community as well. Are you relying on ticket sales as well as donations?
We'll be relying on all aspects of funding for the museum.
Okay. And in addition to that, in the conditions of approval, as Glenn has mentioned, the requirement from the fire department is to install a fire protection system. Are you aware of that?
Yes, I'm quite aware of that. And it's my impression that it would take 300 visitors to trigger the need for a sprinkler system. Unfortunately, I haven't seen the code directly. I've not read it directly, but that's my impression. If there were 300 or more people wanting to attend the museum at once, then the building would require a sprinkler system. In this case, the maximum number is 98, and actually I would prefer 75, just to maintain security of my collections in there. So I'm hoping that the attendance, the maximum attendance, will preclude the need or use of a sprinkler system.
Okay, then there are 2 exits out of the museum. As you can tell, one of them is closer to the parking lot. In order to have crowd control or entry point control, how are you going to prevent from people walking out with things?
We will have people posted at both the front and back doors.
Oh, so you're going to have security staff?
Yes.
Okay.
Most museums employ security staffs at their front and exit.
Okay, and the last question is, as you're curating, will this evolve? The exhibit, would it evolve over time?
Yes, it would. We plan to make some very special acquisitions in the next 3 to 5 years that will add tremendous value to the collections. We don't have enough room to show everything in our inventory, so whatever exhibits won't be on display in 1 year may be rotated so that other inventory pieces will be brought in to take their place.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Commissioner Dannenfeld?
Thank you for your presentation. I mean no disrespect by my questions, by the way, but I'm unfamiliar generally with museums whose collections consist of replicas as opposed to originals. I know they exist, obviously. And you mentioned the fact that this is sort of an international exhibit. We want to make sure it's an international exhibit and a quality exhibit because we like to think Palm Springs is an international city. How are we to rely on the fact that these are really great replicas, not knowing the artisans who did them, not having any certifications? And is there a market for these? Do collectors trade duplicates, non-authentic items of artifacts? Can we say these are things that collectors would want? I'm just trying to get a grasp on the integrity of this inventory and what this museum is going to be all about.
Well, I would suggest, if you have the time, to call some of the past museum venues listed on our website. These are museum quality artifacts that were especially commissioned for display in museums. I don't know, I don't have a lot of knowledge about other collectors and how they operate with regard to trading artifacts between one another. My artifacts are commissioned by museums. The Egyptian artifacts are sanctioned by the Department of Antiquities of Egypt, and they are produced by a generation of artisans who've been doing it for decades, since the discovery of King Tut's treasures in 1922. It's a whole family of artisans that have been doing it for many years. They come from the Pharaonic village, which is just outside of Cairo in Giza, and some of them are replicated by the Egyptian Art Center in Cairo itself. So there are other collectors, there are other exhibitions of replicas of King Tut's treasures, some more extensive than others, but they all are indeed replicas.
Do the replicas have intrinsic value?
Yes, they do. Some of them are very rare. Some of them are antique. Some of them were made in the 30s, 40s, 50s. They have more value than the ones that they are making today.
And how accurately are they replicated? Would you say to a close to 100% degree accuracy?
Very much so, sir. These artisans had direct access to the originals.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Commissioner Hudson, did you still have a question?
Would you respond to the question about the second level of the building, the second floor?
Of course.
Thank you.
The second level is very small. In fact, I would call it an attic. An adult cannot stand up straight on the second floor. It's very limited space. It does not reach from one end to the other. It's not a full second floor. I would say it only covers a quarter of the building. I would consider it an attic space.
Will you be utilizing it for storage or any other use?
I might use it for exhibits that I'm going to be rotating, but there's not enough square footage to store very much in there at all. It's truly an attic space. Any storage that I will need will be off-site storage. You're welcome.
Are there any more questions of the applicant? Hearing no more questions, thank you very much for coming up.
Thank you.
Is there a motion on the floor? Okay, their motion's been made, it's been seconded. Can we all vote? Oh, sorry, it said staff approval. Thank you. Go ahead.
I'd like to make a motion to approve with one condition, which I alluded to in my question, that the window not have a screen on it. I'm afraid it's just going to become, a blank window, and I don't think that's what we want to present to the public. That a wall is built a distance back from the window far enough to allow some sort of exhibit or presentation made to the glass.
I'll accept that as a seconder.
Okay, motion has been made and it's been seconded with one condition. All vote.
Oh, sorry, and the staff report recommendation.
And the staff report recommendation. Yeah. And the motion passes unanimously. Thank you. We're going to move on to item 2B. I understand that we may want a continuance of item 2B to February 13th, 2013. But before I do that, is there anyone in the audience that's here to speak on the Sons of Italy? Hearing nobody who's here and wanting to speak, can I get a motion to continue it to February 13, 2019?
So moved.
Second? Can I
Have
get a
you
second?
enter your motion on the screen, please? In a second.
Motion's been approved. A motion's been made and seconded. You guys vote? Did you vote? Continue it. Okay. Motion passes. It's continued to February 13, 2019. Item number 2C is continued to a date uncertain, so we want a motion to table it, because since it's a date uncertain, it will be renoticed at that point. Can I get a motion to table item 2C? Commissioner Song and Gardner, could you vote? Sorry. Okay, motion passes. Okay, 2D. This is a public hearing by Coachella Flats LLC for a conditional use permit and a variance application to decommission and remove 363 existing wind turbine generators and replace them with 20 new wind turbine generators with a maximum height of 499 feet and 2 315 feet tall meteorological towers on an approved parcel that is 858 acres located west of North Indian Canyon Drive, north of Highway 111, and south of Interstate 10 Freeway. It's Zone W, Section 23. And with that, can we have a staff report, please? Planner's just coming in.
Yes, Mr. Chair, Mr. Robertson is going to be distributing handouts to you.
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, may I ask for a 5-minute break so that I can distribute what I have for you?
Certainly. The staff has requested a 5-minute break. If that's okay, let's take a 5-minute break and reconvene at 2:20.
Thank you.
just to the public, we'll be with you in a moment. So I'll reconvene the meeting of the Planning Commission, and we're waiting for a staff report. Is staff ready to give that report?
Yes, sir.
Do you need more time?
Just 1 second. Right. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the Planning Commission. So on January 9th, 2019, this item was presented to you, but you had a series of questions, and as a result, you voted to continue the hearing to a study session that was held earlier on today. And so following that study session, there are some changes that have been made, not to the project description, but to the mitigation measures and to the conditions of approval. The changes that are made to the conditions of approval reflects the comments contained in the letter that was received yesterday and that was distributed to the Planning Commission today. Staff has met with members of the applicant, and they have indicated to staff that they will be agreeable to those changes, and as a result, staff will be recommending that A, the Planning Commission adopt the mitigated negative declarations and approve the project subject to the conditions of approval that you previously had and the changed conditions of approval. So basically that will conclude my report, but if you have any other questions, I am here. So is the applicant. They are here to make presentations to you. But before then, I just want to go back to those changes. I have them here if you want to discuss those, or if there are any additional questions on those conditions. And also, well, before then, I just want to clarify one of the tables that you have in the staff report regarding the safety setbacks. So if you look at the third column where it says proposed setbacks, and if you recall, last week in responding to one of the commissioner's questions where the development code requires a 1.25 of the total height of the works, you asked what the applicant was asking for. At that time, staff only provided to you the distance in feet. But going back now, you will discover that in this revised table, the requirement or the proposed setback by the applicant on the safety setback for the transmission lines will be 1.05, different than the 1.25 required by the code. And as a result, this will require a variance by the Planning Commission. And then on the safety setback for the railroad right-of-way, again, the code requires a 1.25 times the height of the turbine, which would have been 624 feet. The applicant is proposing a 1.12 or 460 feet from the railroad. This also requires a variance. So those, I just want to put this up there for an additional clarification. And then on the environmental assessment conditions, these are the changes that have been made. That number one, that the initial study, in the cumulative impact section of the initial study, the determination of no impact shall be replaced with a determination of less than significant impact with mitigation measures, and the applicant shall be required to submit a risk assessment strategy to the city. And also, the recommendations from the Sierra Club that the project proponent shall be required to implement all the recommendations contained in the comment letter received from the Sierra Club on January 21, 2019. So to be specific, they are that the first one was regarding the determination of no impact, followed by that the applicant shall not use any guide wires, and if any guide wires are used, flight diverters shall be installed to reduce impacts to avian species. And that the use of lattice towers for the wind turbines shall be prohibited, except in the case of Met towers. And then also regarding the changes made to the mitigation measures. So in the previous mitigation measures, the applicant was required to conduct on-site monitoring for 2 years, but that has been changed to 3 years. So that will conclude the staff report. Again, I'm available to answer any further questions that you may have. The applicants are also here to answer any of your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Edward. I'm sure there's going to be questions. What I'd like to do is start on my left and just go around the dais one commissioner at a time, starting with Commissioner Maruzzi.
Yes, Mr. Robertson.
Yes, sir.
For the environmental assessment conditions number 3, can you just change where it says recommendations from the Sierra Club to the recommendations from the Sierra Club and the Center for Biological Diversity, since both of them authored that letter?
Absolutely.
And the rest of my questions will be for the applicant.
Thank you.
I have no questions.
Yeah, so in going back to the conclusions of the referenced letter in the environmental assessment conditions that you've amended, the first thing it says is that they want the Planning Commission to require all the proposed trustee agency recommendations. And what is the trustee agency and what are those recommendations?
I guess that's just a general language they use. I'm not sure who the trustee, okay, the director will help.
What they intend there is relative to the comments that were received from the California Department of Fish and Wildlife and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. If you go to attachment number 9, which is the response to comments, you have the specific response to each of the things that both of those organizations are requesting and how those have been addressed in the mitigation measures. And so what we have done as part of the mitigation measures is incorporated the recommendations of both the California and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services in the mitigation measures. And all the Sierra Club is asking is that we retain those as the mitigation measures.
So those comments by those two agencies are now moving from the realm of comment to requirement?
Yes, to mitigation measures.
Under this proposal?
Yes, correct. And again, that's in attachment number 9, which details the response to comments.
So is what's being required the comment and the response, or just the comment?
What is being required is the response to the comment. So you'll see, for example...
Let me pull it up. There's so much paper here, I haven't been able to get it. So can you give me a second?
Yeah.
It's attachment number... Oh, that's the wrong file. Attachment number 9? Okay. Okay, so go ahead, I'm sorry. Example?
So for an example, if you go to the response to comments under letter B, Department of Fish and Wildlife.
Yes.
And you see comment B2, it's rather lengthy. What that comes down to is the very last paragraph asks that a risk assessment for the take of birds and bats be performed. And then if you go to response B2, the preparation and submittal of a risk assessment for migratory birds and bats has been added as a mitigation measure.
So without reading the whole attachment number 9, are there any comments that are being denied or modified significantly?
I wouldn't say modified significantly. There are some where we have made minor changes to the language. For example, on the risk assessment, instead of saying that the risk assessment, I'm sorry, I need to go back to the mitigation measures.
Are you in number 9 still?
Yeah. So instead of saying the project proponent shall prepare and implement, it says the project proponent shall prepare and submit. So those are the minor changes that we have made. That's an example of one of them.
What's
but essentially we are keeping, I'm sorry?
Just in reference to that, what is the difference between submitting a plan and implementing a plan?
Very little.
So if there's very little, then why would you change it?
Because it's more accurate in terms of the process of how the document is reviewed. So again, if you go through all of the response to comments, we have incorporated those as mitigation measures. And so the agencies, both the California Department and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Survey, had made comments. We have incorporated those as mitigation measures. And by so doing, we then address the concern of the Sierra Club, which is requesting that we do incorporate those comments.
And so it's your judgment that the comments don't dilute or alter the comments from the Fish and Wildlife, the trustee agencies?
Correct, that we feel that that is accurately representing and incorporating their recommendations.
Thank you for that.
I just wanted to make a clarification. So the monitoring time would be the first year, the third year, and the fifth year? Or did you say only the first year and the third year, Edward?
You mean, are you referring to the change that was made in the mitigation measure?
Yes.
Okay, so that language reads that, sorry. Okay, so what it says is that at least 3 years of on-site monitoring. So that means, no, it doesn't say, initially it had said 2 years, but now it extended to 3 years. So if it's been done every week or every other week, it will continue for 3 years as opposed to limited into 2 years.
Okay, and one more question, Edward. So for example, on mitigation measure 5, it says, it's about the Eagle. And then under responsible for monitoring, it says developer, planning department, and qualified biologist. So those are 3 independent parties who are going to be monitoring.
Yes, and as I mentioned earlier, the city will be hiring a third party that will conduct those monitoring for us and be submitting the reports to the city.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, please, go ahead.
So the cost of that third-party monitor that you're referring to, is that borne by the applicant or by the city?
So we met earlier on with the applicant, and they've agreed to bear the cost.
And is that part of the staff recommendation if we say?
It is part of our recommendations,
Okay.
yes.
Commissioner Gardner, did you have any questions? No questions. Are there any more questions from the commission? Hearing no questions, I know the applicant is present. You have 10 minutes to make a presentation, and then we'll take public testimony. The public hearing is open, after which you'll have 3 minutes for a rebuttal. If you'd state your name again and your address.
Hi, my name is Robert Skaggs. I'm a developer with the applicant, and my address, San Diego. Well, once again, I just wanted to thank the commission and the planning department for all the work that you've put into reviewing this project. These are complex and they take time to digest, and I just appreciate very much your time and effort, and especially this morning going through the study session. I don't want to take up a lot of time here. I just wanted to say that, again, we feel this is an excellent repowering project. It's a great location. It takes out old equipment, puts in new equipment. It's just a lot of great benefits all around for both the city and the region. And we're just excited about it. And we hope that you take the time and are able to vote on it today. And in the meantime, I have my team here, and we're ready to answer any additional questions that you may have that are forthcoming. So just look forward to resolving any additional outstanding questions you may have.
Thank you. Are there any members of the audience wishing to speak on this particular item? Seeing no members wishing to speak, did you want to say anything else?
No, I think I'll be brief.
Okay. I'm sure there's again going to be questions of the applicant, so I'll start to my right this time, and we'll go to my left, towards my left. No questions? Questions? Mr. Hirschman?
Yeah. We've noted changes from this morning's proposal to the current proposal before us. Can you opine a bit on what those changes are and what they mean to you specifically?
Yeah, I think, well, first I think they provide the city comfort with some of the outstanding issues related to biology that were concerning that we've agreed to adopt. I think it clarifies things. Again, we've agreed to these minor changes to the original mitigation, accepting the Sierra Club recommendations. We did have originally comments to some of the conditions of approval, but upon further reflection, we're comfortable with the way they are as is.
Commissioner Donenfeld.
One question. One of the additions under the mitigated negative declaration, you're adding a requirement under mitigation, development of an injured bird response plan that delineates care and curation of any and all injured birds and storage of injured birds. It's a terrific idea. I'm wondering if you've done this before on other projects, and if you have, how does it work?
Bring up my bird expert here, Kevin Martin, that can answer that question far better than I can.
Good afternoon. I'm Kevin Martin. I'm the Director of Environmental Permitting for Terrigen Power in San Diego. That's a very good question. And the day-to-day operations of the wind farm is what at the end of the day, is what's important to us. We have in place a corporate bird and bat conservation plan. And in that, it discusses the training of our staff for the monitoring of the projects and the reporting. Sometimes those birds, we've never had a listed species, but sometimes it warrants contacting the agencies. At that time, we leave it to their authority and their discretion as to what we do to dispose of that. Sometimes they say leave it in place. Sometimes they'll say take it to a rehabilitation center. Sometimes they'll say we'll pick it up. So it leaves it to their discretion, but we've got in place in the field for the monitoring and the reporting
What do you do about finding an injured bird who might be able to be saved?
There was an eagle that was found, not on the project site, but adjacent in the city of Mojave. That eagle seemed to be suffering from some sort of ailment. Probably it was determined later that it was lead poisoning. We contacted the agency, we watched the bird, and then we decided that we were told what to do with it. We subsequently sent it to Bakersfield. It has a rehabilitation center. At that same time, we gave the facility about $2,000 for the rehabilitation. Afterwards, that bird was rehabilitated and eventually released back into the wild with a transmitter, so it furthered the understanding of how those birds behave in the area. It was not struck by a wind turbine. It did not hit a power line. It was suffering from lead toxosis and ulcers on its wings and could not fly. So that's typically what will happen. That's just one example.
Are your people typically on site, walking around the site pretty much every day?
Yes, sir. They have a systematic monitoring program, not only for, and we discussed that this morning, for trespass issues, for trash, erosion, how the roads are doing. So they're out there every day on a rotational basis.
Great, thank you. Appreciate
You're very
it.
welcome.
Commissioner Maruzzi?
First of all, I just want to commend you for agreeing to the mitigations and the recommendations of both staff and Sierra Club and the Center for Biological Diversity. So that's quite admirable. Thank you. Just have some specific questions about some of the mitigations. Number 5, this issue of the Eagle Conservation Plan. You talked about, it takes 5 years or so to get a take permit. I mean, why would you not making this a condition of approval, but after the project is approved, you go ahead and start the process for this permit? I mean, why would you not do that?
So the risk is why we typically, that's how we base our determination. And we have many projects throughout the state and the United States that are greenfield development. And the assessments that we do inform us as to what level of risk exists for impacting golden eagles and violating the Bald and Golden Eagle Protection Act. This valley has so few incidents that, relatively speaking, it would not warrant a direct initiation, if you will, of that process.
Is it because of cost?
No, it's because of uncertainty, and it may be that once it's operational, we can determine the level of risk. If we're seeing eagles flying around, if there are eagles that are perhaps killed somewhere else adjacent to it, we would then initiate with the service. But at this point, there's nothing that warrants the need for.
No, I get what you're saying. That makes perfect sense. Just for the heck of it, why wouldn't you go ahead and do it anyway? I mean, why, if it was something that was made as a condition here, I mean, why wouldn't you do it?
So the steps in the process, there's a nuance to it. It's not just filling out an application. It's working with the service on what goes into that application. It's not like going down and applying for a DMV motor license. Site conditions warrant the need for the next step. It's very iterative. And so we will continue to operate on the site, but based on what we see out there, we'll determine what we do. So we will always, if we don't do it now, something may happen 5 years from now that will. But right now, it's.
But it takes 5 years to get the permit.
It took 6 years for the last
6
one that I
years.
got. And that's
I think you've answered the question. I'm not quite sure, but I think I'll go with that. The other thing has to do with this Eagle Conservation Plan that was taken out from the original mitigation. Why did you remove that part?
The Eagle Conservation Plan is the third step in determining if an eagle take permit is warranted. The assessment on whether to put an Eagle Conservation Plan together is based on information from the operational site or information from a site that hasn't been operating, a greenfield.
Therefore,
we do not believe that Eagle Conservation Plan is necessary.
So if it was proposed that you accept this mitigation as was originally proposed, would you be willing to accept that? Is this a deal breaker? Attorney.
So no, it is not warranted. We're going to stick with that.
For mitigation measure 7, let me make sure it's 7. Yeah, 7. The change was this injured bird response. So storage simply means storage of injured birds is just hanging on to them until you decide what to do with the bird, or the service takes the bird, or?
That is wording that came from the comment. We did not craft that.
Okay.
But
I mean, what do you think it means?
We will act under the recommendations of the agencies once we contact them, and that's all we can do.
So storage just means hanging on to the bird and making sure that it doesn't die, or whatever, trying to make sure.
They may say watch it, which is
watch
not
it, give some bird water or whatever.
Right.
Okay.
Any more questions of the applicant?
I'm willing to make a motion, actually.
Well, let me close the public hearing. I'll close the public hearing, and now it's debate between the commissioners. Commissioner Maruzzi?
It's too late.
Okay.
The comment's over.
Mr. Noble, would you like to step forward and?
This will be mercifully brief. Frederick Noble, here in my individual capacity, I have no economic interest in this project. The whole issue of birds was, I thought, put to bed about 10 permits ago. There has never been an eagle or a hawk killed by a windmill in this area, anywhere east of Highway 62 or south of 10, north or south of 10. Years ago, people asserted that was the case, and I offered a $10,000 reward. Anybody could bring evidence of an eagle killed in this area. Nobody claimed the reward. They don't come down here. They live up in the hills. This has been accepted by many planning commissions, by city council on 7 or 8 permits I know of my personal knowledge. The whole bird issue is a red herring and a false issue here. And requiring mitigation for a problem that doesn't exist strikes me as ill-advised. The letters you get from Fish and Wildlife and Fish and Game are always kind of wish lists that they push out, and they have regularly been ignored completely by the city and the planning department, city council for years and years, because they see them for what they are, which is sort of a wish list by people that don't have a lot of economic interest in what's going on. This condition of requiring these people to build a hospital for birds that will always be empty strikes me as odd. I say this with great confidence. Mercifully down here, the eagles and the hawks don't get killed by windmills. It just doesn't happen. I had a project in Northern California where the reverse was the case, and we had mortality, and it was terrible. But to go down this path again where the city has uniformly, over many permits, realized that there is no eagle or hawk issue in the desert is surprising to me that we're going back and visiting those issues. The Fish and Wildlife letters are sometimes a bit murky. They mentioned 2 eagles killed in Cabazon. They were killed up on the top of Alta Mesa, which is about 4,000 feet elevation. And neither of them could be identified as killed by a windmill. There's been one eagle found in the flat of the desert in the last 40 years that I've been doing windmills here. It was on Dillon Road, and it hit a power line. Its wing was cut. A windmill blade is like getting hit by a bus. It's blunt. It doesn't cut anything. That's the one raptor that has been identified as found injured or dead in this area, and there was no evidence it was killed by a windmill. In fact, it was killed by an Edison power line. So that is just something for you to think about.
Can I have you wrap up, Mr. Noble?
Yes. On noise, have any of you been out to see the windmills? When we had windmill tours, we took staff out some years ago. You can't hear these machines at their base. A little bit of a whoosh, but there's no noise that carries anywhere near any neighbors. So that's an issue which really doesn't play in this regard. Thank you.
Thank you. We appreciate your institutional knowledge and sharing it with us. And with that, I will open it to the Planning Commission for discussion. Commissioner Maruzzi?
The issue in my mind isn't strictly eagles. It's birds and bats, migratory birds, birds that have been listed here that were mentioned in some of the reports. So I think the bird and bat conservation study and the risk assessment as relates to how they're presented in the mitigation measures makes sense, even putting aside the issue of raptors.
Okay, I'll go around to the Commission. Commissioner Donenfeld?
With the changes that have been made, I think I'm very much in favor of the project. I think it's important that Palm Springs be a leader in wind energy conservation, and I think we should go forward with the project with the changes that we've been able to discuss and that the applicant has been so cooperative in agreeing to.
Commissioner Hirschbein? I think Commissioner Hudson? Commissioner Song? Commissioner, great. With that, do I have a motion on the floor?
Just to preface that, I am very much in support of repower projects. I just wanted to make sure that all of these issues that are very complex and a very tall stack of documents that we had were addressed, made sense to me. I have not dealt with these issues before. Other planning commissions have, other city councils have. I haven't. So I appreciated the study session, and I think the answers ultimately made sense. So I would move that we approve the project with the mitigation measures that we received from Mr. Robertson later, as well as the planning, is it the planning assessment? Those changes that were on that document as well. I'm not going to insist on the Eagle issue. I just wanted to better understand it, and I'm satisfied with that. And then I don't think we're asking for a bird hospital. I don't think that mentions that in here anywhere. But regardless, that's my motion as it's written.
Okay, the motion has been made, and it appears the motion has been seconded.
I have a question.
Question?
Mr. Murphy, you are also recommending that we approve the conditional use permit and the variance application.
Yes.
And Mr. Chair, this will also be adoption of the environmental document as well.
Yes, I agree with that.
Okay, please vote. The motion passes unanimously. Congratulations. I'd just like to take a moment of personal thanks, a 3-point personal thanks. I'd like to thank the applicant for coming back, for sitting through an entire morning study session with us as a commission and informing us. I'd like to thank staff for at the very last minute mediating, and our attorneys with the attorneys and with the applicant. And lastly, I'd like to thank this commission. The amount of material this commission had to read before today's meetings was immense. I cannot describe how immense it is. I had to buy a special briefcase just to carry it all. And I want to thank the entire commission for being doing their due diligence for the citizens of Palm Springs in reading all of that material and having a very educated, thought-provoking discussion to get to the point we got to today. So thank you to all three of you. Thank you. Okay.
Mr. Chair, if I might, because we have a group here for item 4A, if you wouldn't mind, I'd recommend that we move 4A up and then trail item 2E, which is a zone text amendment. I don't believe that we have any members of the audience here to speak on that.
Is there any opposition from anyone in the commission on that? Okay. And do we have a recusal for that?
Yes, I will have to recuse from the next project.
Okay, thank you.
So just for members of the public, for our Planning Commission, Ms. Song is involved with item number 4A in the design of the project. She will be recusing herself from any vote or discussion on this item and will be leaving the chambers.
Okay, I'll read the opening of the item. Item 4A is the Community Housing Opportunities Corporation on behalf of the City of Palm Springs for an architectural review application to construct a multifamily residential complex on an undeveloped 3.6-acre parcel of land located on the east side of North Indian Canyon Drive between San Rafael Road and Simmons Road. The zone is R2 and the section is 2. And with that, can we have a staff report?
Yes, Chair Woods, Vice Chair Maruzzi, and Planning Commissioners. The request before you is an architectural application for the construction of a 60-unit apartment complex. 59 of these units are proposed to be reserved for low and very low income households, and the sizes of those units range from 560 square feet to 1,075 square feet. They will be 1, 2, and 3 bedroom units. The project also includes a community building that would provide resources for the residents of the community. And the project also, of course, involves related landscape parking improvements to the site with additional outdoor communal amenities for the residents. Overall, the site is 3.6 acres in size. So this project is being processed in accordance with Senate Bill number 35, which was approved in 2017 and became law last year. This project, as an affordable housing project under this Senate bill, is being proposed for ministerial review, which is slightly different than your typical review for architectural review, in that we're reviewing objective design review standards and objective requirements. Does the project meet objective standards? So those are what the project is being, how the project is being reviewed by the city. They are proposing a density bonus for the project, and the project does have, under Senate Bill number 35, there are parking standards that the project is subject to, which are different than the city's, and would supersede any requirements by the city standards. The Senate Bill number 35 also allows for waivers, incentives, and other concessions as a part of the state law. So they are requesting a setback reduction at the northwest corner of the project site from 30 feet to 20 feet. The property is currently owned by the city, and before the sale of the property can occur, the Planning Commission has to make a finding that the sale would be consistent with the general plan. So that kind of just goes as a brief overview of the process for this project. In staff's review of the project, we took a look at the housing element and the general plan land use element. And the housing element was adopted in 2014 and is for an 8-year period. Part of the housing element includes the regional housing needs assessment, and it has certain requirements that the city has to provide affordable housing for various income levels. You see here on the slide, Table 3-18 from the housing element provides the total number of units required for each of these income levels. So to date, we know that only the above moderate housing has been constructed, and we are still short of providing the number of units for extremely low to moderate income housing level units necessary for this 8-year period. So the project would assist in creating 59 units of the remaining units that the city has to provide within this 8-year period. As I stated, 59 units, 24 of those would be low-income household, reserved for very low-income households, and 35 reserved for low-income households, and would assist the project. The project would assist the city in complying and meeting goals of the housing element with respect to affordable housing. In the land use element, the project is designated as mixed-use multi-use, and this designation allows 15 dwelling units per acre or 30 dwelling units per acre with the approval of a planned development. Greater density can be permitted for affordable housing projects, and that is being requested here with a 16.6 to 1 unit per acre density bonus that is permitted under the general plan. The site is within the R2 zone, and the R2 zone does permit multifamily residential, so the project is consistent with this zone in terms of permitted uses. As far as development standards, on page 7 of your report, staff outlined all of the development standards that the project is required to adhere to, and did note some additional and did indicate where applicable additional standards that Senate Bill 35 provides for affordable housing projects. So those are with respect to the off-street parking and, again, the setback reduction that is being requested for the northwest corner of the site. So 30-foot requirement is the setback from San Rafael, and they are proposing 20 feet. The parking does exceed the minimum parking required for an affordable housing project. The Senate Bill 35 limits parking to one parking space per unit. The project exceeds that number and provides 72 parking spaces on the property. So to go over some of the project plans, what you have here on the slide is the site plan. And you can see on the left side, the southerly portion of the site is a parking area, as well as on the right side, the northerly portion of the site. The one-story buildings are shown in red and the dark red in the center. There's 5 one-story buildings along the easterly side of the site, and the community building is in the center, building E. And then the 2-story buildings are located on the westerly portion of the site. So those are buildings B, C, and D. And between these clusters on the westerly portion of the site are courtyards. There's 2 courtyards with picnic and barbecue areas. And then a water play area is located in the center. This slide shows the street views of the property. So at the top, you see the streetscape view from Indian Canyon Drive. Below that are the streetscapes of San Rafael and Sims Road. And then there are site sections that delineate the line through the property going from north to south, or excuse me, east to west. The applicant did provide some color perspectives of various vantage points within the property. So that is what you see here on this slide. And the slide here provides kind of a conceptual view of the various planting tree locations. There is a proposed privacy hedge along the easterly edge of the property, as well as trees interspersed throughout the site. I also forgot to mention just to the west of the water play tot lot area is a proposed small dog park. So that's these are enlarged views of the central area, the play area, and as well as the plaza courtyard area for the southerly cluster of the 2-story buildings. One other thing to note about the landscape areas is that the westerly edge and essentially the northerly and southerly edge of the site will have a meandering garden wall to provide a screen or to block walking in and out of the site other than from the driveway areas. They do show some of the various amenities within the property. With this exhibit here, you see the proposed benches and some of the seating furniture that is being proposed in the outdoor community spaces, as well as the play area splash pad amenities that are conceptually being considered for the project. Here are some of the lighting fixtures that are anticipated for the project, as well as the conceptual signage. However, the final design of the signs would be reviewed by staff. Building A is what is shown on the screen. It is the one-story units located along the easterly side of the project. These are one-story buildings. The height is, is 11 to 15 feet from the lower roof edge to the higher roof edge. And these buildings are, in terms of their pad elevation, they range from 1 to 2 feet above the existing pads or the existing single-family homes to the east. So there is, this is consistent with the slope or the existing topography, which is a little bit higher than those homes currently. So these are relatively similar in terms of its scale to the buildings located east of the project site. Building B is, these are the elevations for Building B, as well as some perspectives. It is a two-story building along the southwesterly corner of the site, and another location on the northwest corner of the site. Building C, another two-story building at the northwest corner, and this would be the building fronting San Rafael. You see some perspectives here at the top right, as well as this building is proposed along the southwest corner of the property. And Building E is the community building, so this is also a one-story building. And then the materials that are being proposed, you see here, are plaster, primarily on the exterior, with various accents of different materials, of tile, faux wood, and then windows are proposed to be aluminum, light bronze, anodized. The applicant does have the actual material board here, if that is requested of the commission to be reviewed. Again, so this is the preliminary grading plan for the project. So it does show the various locations of the buildings, the pad elevations, as well as the finished floors. And it also shows the locations of the parking areas. As you'll note, the pad elevations on the bottom of the screen are the existing homes located to the east of the site. And again, the proposed single-story buildings on the easterly portion of the project site range from about 1 to 2 feet, no more than 2 feet in overall pad elevation. So that's the variation between the existing and proposed pads. Under the California Environmental Quality Act, the project meets criteria necessary for being exempt from further environmental review. This is in accordance with CEQA Guidelines Section 15268, which states that ministerial reviewed projects are not subject to CEQA. And further, under Section 15192 and 15194, as an affordable housing project meeting certain requirements within those sections, the project is not subject to further environmental review. So staff has outlined that in your report as well as in the draft resolution. So some additional information that you did not receive in your packet, I just wanted to touch on briefly here. There's a correction to engineering condition number 59 as it relates to the transportation uniform mitigation fee. This project, as an affordable housing project, is exempt from making this payment pursuant to Section 8.90.070 of the Palm Springs Municipal Code. So we would just note that that would be a change to the draft resolution before you. And also, I just wanted to note that we have received some additional correspondence for the project. the applicant has provided a letter outlining the reasoning for the reduced setback from 30 to 20 feet along San Rafael. And then lastly, there were 3 letters of support from members of the public and organizations. So that concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. This is not a public hearing. However, the applicant is available if you have specific questions for them that I can't answer. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Before I open it to the commission for questions of staff, the framework of which we're reviewing this, we're not reviewing the architecture, is that correct?
We're not reviewing it under the typical architectural review guidelines that you would see, or where you have subjective design review. This is really objective review, and does the project meet specific standards? So it's looking at specific, basically the objective standards that we would review projects under.
And is the setback variance or the setback waiver that they're asking for, is that within a ministerial approval as well, or does that need our approval?
It is within a ministerial approval as a concession for an affordable housing project. They can request that as a part of the standard waivers that are permitted under the Senate Bill 35.
Okay, thank you. With that, I'll open it to questions from the commission. Commissioner Hirschman.
Thanks for that report, and I'd like to just ask a couple questions. Can you put the slide back on that has the housing element, that chart?
Yes.
Okay. Do we know, or is it part of the agreement with the city that these be either for sale or rental, or is it up to the applicant to decide that later?
It's not specified that it has to be one or the other. It can be either option.
And it's up to the applicant?
Correct.
Okay. Can you tell us what the actual numbers are in terms of income when it talks about percent of county medium family income? Is that right? MFI? Is that medium?
Right.
Medium family income? And what does less than 30% mean? And can you tell us what those actual numbers are?
Housing element defines household income, or indicated that in the 2010 census, the city's medium family income was approximately $51,000.
So the extremely low would be 30% of that.
There are actually figures that are put out by the Department of Finance for each county in the state of California that define what the various categories are: extremely low, very low, low, etc. If you remember, I passed those out to you when we had the study session.
I apologize. That's right.
And I'd be happy to print those out again if you'd like those.
It's just a point of interest for me. It's not nothing I'm conditioning anything on. And correct me if I'm wrong, but aren't we about to adopt, or isn't it part of state law, that housing, affordable housing projects can use up to or build up to 70 units per acre? Am I correct about that?
You have an item later on your agenda that addresses that in terms of the density. Under state law, as you'll recall from our study session that we had on the density bonus ordinance, there are specific standards in terms of what is permitted for affordable housing, in terms of the maximum density bonus that they can request based on the percentage of units that are affordable. But we'll talk about that under item 2E, which
I was just trying to square that against what's being proposed. So my question basically is, would this site have allowed for that, for up to 70 units per acre?
This site would not allow up to 70 units per acre. There's only one specific area in the city that would. However, the density bonus that they're requesting is much less than what is permissible under state law or under our ordinance that will be at second reading tonight at City Council.
And again, just point of interest, do we know what that number is for this site?
Let's see, the density that's permissible on the site, David, is what, 54 units?
So it's 53 units under the R2 zone, and there's an additional 21 permitted through the density bonus, which would equate to 74.
Okay, so they could, could conceivably have asked for 74 units on this site. Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Maruzzi.
So just to clarify, there really isn't much we're approving this, since this is ministerial. What exactly is it we're approving?
You're approving the project in that it meets these objective standards.
And your conclusion is that it does. It meets criteria necessary to qualify for ministerial review.
Yes.
Okay. And just to be a little bit more specific, we're looking specifically at the R2 development standards in terms of height, setbacks, et cetera, what is not otherwise requested for waiver under state law.
Just to address one of the questions that someone in the audience asked earlier regarding visual impacts to the Wexler designed steel homes in the north end, there was a study that was done by CRM Tech that's in our packet, and let's read their conclusion. They say, oh, by the way, given that the one-story buildings are on the east side of the project, I understand that that was one of the reasons why they are one-story at that location is because of the concerns about impacts to the Wexler houses, the steel houses. So I think that's admirable. It says that these heights and distances, the buildings in the project would be partially visible from human eye level on the parcels occupied by the Wexler steel houses over an existing concrete block wall that marks the property boundary and stands roughly 6 feet tall, but would not be considered a prominent visual or atmospheric intrusion into the view shed for the historic buildings. And so they conclude, the design and aesthetics of this project are found to be consistent with the architectural heritage of the city as well as the overall characteristics of the Wexler steel houses. And I agree with that from my knowledge of the steel houses, and I've been there very recently. And I think that this report is accurate, just to address that issue that was brought up.
Any more questions for staff from the commission? Does the commission want to hear from the applicant again? Staff or, sorry, Commissioner?
So I know that there's been a lot of discussion about this already, and it sounds like there's not a whole lot that's going to be changed, at least on our end. But I did want to just point out that, we have 28 one-bedrooms here and then 32 total between 2 and 3 bedrooms. I know we have a lot of families in Palm Springs, and there's definitely a need for a lot of 3-bedroom homes and just larger units in general. So I am interested kind of in hearing the reasoning behind having 28 one-bedrooms and why not having some more 3 bedrooms, because I do think it's a big need in our community. So I'm not sure if the applicant or if the city has comments.
Mr. Chair, I think it would be appropriate for the applicant to address the unit mix.
Could the applicant come up, please, and restate your name and your title again?
Vincent Nicholas with Chalk Community Housing Opportunities, Vice President of Real Estate Development. To answer the question on the unit mix, our 1, 2, and 3 bedrooms for tax credit requirements that we follow, and with income levels and rents that we follow as well. The mix works best with 1 bedrooms at the 28 count, and then we meet the minimums requirements for 2 and 3 bedrooms. There's other impacts. If we look at 3 bedrooms, it just increases the size of the building sizes. We begin to go outside of the boundaries of where our limits are within the development of the site. So it's kind of limits ourselves with trying to make the correct unit mix that works the best for the project. We think what we have today is the best for the site. I hope that answers your question.
Okay, any more questions of either the applicant and or staff? Hearing none, is there a motion on the floor?
I move approval of the staff report.
And that's been seconded by Maruzzi?
Yes, I second that.
Okay. All in favor? Vote.
And by the way, I'd like to say I think it's a very well-needed, well-done project.
I agree. I think it's amazing.
It passes unanimously. Thank you, gentlemen and women. Okay, we're going to take 1 minute while we bring Commissioner Song back into the room. Yes. thank you all for coming. The democracy works by your participation. We appreciate you being here and voicing your opinions when you did. Thank you very much. Yeah, I'm getting stumped.
One more item.
Just for your information, item 4A passed unanimously. So. Okay, I want to move on to item 2E. It's an amendment to the Palm Springs zoning code to establish general standards for mixed-use development and to allow up to 70 dwelling units per acre in mixed-use areas as permitted by the City of Palm Springs general plan. Can we have a staff report, please?
Mr. Chair and members of the Commission, this is the final of 4 zone text amendments to implement recommendations of our housing element. And Mr. Hirschbein, this is the one where we talk about 70 units to the acre, so we'll get into that in just a minute. As you'll recall, we've already seen the density bonus ordinance, we've seen the reasonable accommodation ordinance, and we've seen the transitional and supportive housing ordinance. This is the final one that is recommended through the actions of our housing element, and this is relative to reducing the barriers to the development of mixed-use development, and specifically allowing up to 70 units per acre where the general plan allows that to occur. And also, as a side note, this also helps to implement several of the recommendations of our ad hoc Plan Development District Committee, which included revisions to our Plan Development District Ordinance, but also it talks about allowing mixed-use development without having to go through the PDD process. One of the things that occurs in our zoning code is although we have a definition for mixed-use development, we don't identify any zone districts where it's a permitted use. We also have parking standards for mixed-use development, although those parking standards don't address residential units as part of that development. And so we've got some holes in our code, and for that reason, that's why we've always seen mixed-use projects come in as a planned development district. It's just because our zoning code didn't really address it. And so this ordinance is intended to correct those defects that we have in our ordinance. One of the things that we are proposing as part of this is to modify the existing definition to clarify that mixed-use development includes a residential component and a commercial and/or civic component as part of that. What was missing is it didn't really identify that residential was a critical component of mixed-use development, and so we're proposing to correct that. One of the things in looking at this is, do we need to adopt separate development standards for mixed-use development? My response to that would be no, that we want development to fit in with its context based on the surrounding properties. So for example, in our C1 zoning district where we require buildings or allow buildings to be up close to the street and is really intended to be a pedestrian district, we have a separate standard for residential that requires them to have greater setbacks and lesser lot coverage. And so under our current zoning code, mixed-use development would not fit in with the context in the C1 district. What I'm proposing to you is that we not establish separate development standards by use, but rather allow the development standards to regulate by zoning district so that there's consistency among the properties. I can go into additional detail on that if you'd like additional explanation on that. Yeah. If we were doing a mixed-use project in a C1 district under our existing zoning ordinance, there's language in there currently that says if you do residential units, then the development has to conform to the R3 development standards. In C1, which is looking at the uptown area of North Palm Canyon, for example, you'll notice in that area the buildings are close up to the sidewalk because the setback requirements allow that. And typically they're built out property line to property line, and so what you get is a very urban form of development. However, because we have that language in the code about any residential uses have to conform to R3 standards, if you were to do a mixed-use development, the residential component would have to have a 25-foot front yard setback. It would have to have a minimum of 15 feet along the sides. And so it would be more of a suburban type of development in an area that's intended for a more urban form. And so for that reason, what I'm recommending to you is that we eliminate that language out of our commercial zoning districts so that mixed-use development is compatible with the other commercial development that is already there existing. Does that make sense?
So in that example, a project that combined commercial on the ground floor with zero setback at Palm Canyon and residential above, would the residential then also allow for zero setback?
Correct, correct. It would follow the standard form in the C1 zoning district.
Thank you.
And so again, that's another barrier that's prevented mixed-use development from occurring, and we're proposing to eliminate that. One of the things that I think is necessary in looking at mixed-use regulations is I think a conditional use permit is still necessary to assess, number one, how the uses work together. Number two, to look at adequacy of parking. Typically with mixed-use development, what you want to see is that you have uses that are complementary in terms of the peak hour of parking. So for example, if you have commercial where the peak hour is typically during the day or the afternoon, and residential, which has a peak hour in the evenings, those uses are compatible because you'll get the greatest efficiency in using your parking areas. And so again, I think a conditional use permit process is the best way to do that. And then also you look at impacts to adjacent properties through that conditional use permit process. And so that's what I'm proposing to you today. Just looking at where we would allow this, let me talk about the central business district zone, as this is probably the most critical to mixed use. The central business district zone is defined on our maps as essentially Ramon Road on the south, Alejo Road on the north, and then it follows Indian Canyon on the east and Belardo on the west, with the exception of going around and capturing the art museum there at the very center of the map. Under the general plan, we would have a base residential density of 21 units to 30 units to the acre. What I'm proposing for the parking for the residential units is that we allow a half a space per unit within the CBD zone or the downtown parking combining zone. The reason that I'm proposing that is because in that area, there is less need for vehicles because we have essentially the needs of daily life, that residents who live in that area will be less dependent on vehicles in that area, especially with grocery outlet coming to downtown that provides a full-line grocery store for residents in that area. And so one of the things I'm proposing in terms of the parking is 0.5 spaces per unit in that area. Now, one of the things that the general plan says is that we should allow up to 70 dwelling units per acre within the downtown central core, which is defined by the general plan as that area that is approximately Tockwitz on the south and Andreas on the north. And it's on the, let's see, it's on the west side of Indian Canyon there. So there's a very limited area where 70 units to the acre would be allowed. Within that area, approximately half of that is already covered by the downtown specific plan, and that does allow a relatively high degree of residential density on the remaining blocks that would be permissible for residential development. The other 50% is outside of that area, and again, it would be permissible to do up to 70 units in that acre. However, outside of that area, it would be limited to a maximum of 30 units to the acre. What else we are proposing is to allow mixed-use development by conditional use permit in the C1 and the C2 zoning districts. I've got a map here on the screen which shows where C1 and C2 properties are located. The purple is C1, the green is C2. You'll see that it's primarily along North Palm Canyon as it extends northward out of the downtown area. There's also a portion along South Palm Canyon. You'll see a number of properties along Vista Chino, and then you'll see also some C2 and very limited C1 along East Palm Canyon. So those are limited areas. However, that is consistent with the general plan designation for those areas. Most of those areas have a general plan designation of mixed use or multi-use, which allows a 15 dwelling unit per acre base ratio or up to 30 dwelling units per acre with a planned development district. That's one of the things we'll be looking at as part of a general plan update, is to remove that restriction. Within these areas, because we're outside of the downtown core, I would propose a residential parking ratio of 1 space per unit. Again, while there will be a limited need for vehicles, I think it would be more so here than in the downtown area, and so that's the proposed difference in those parking ratios. There are some future actions that I'd like to undertake relative to mixed-use development. I think C1, C2, CBD is a start, but I think there's other areas where mixed-use development would be appropriate. And I'm particularly thinking of our shopping center areas. As those properties mature and redevelopment, that mixed-use development would be appropriate in those areas. However, our general plan currently prohibits that. It doesn't identify that residential is appropriate in those areas, nor does it establish a density limit. And so what I'd like to do as part of our general plan update, and this will be in the first phase of our general plan update, is to look at other areas where mixed-use development would be appropriate. And then the second thing I'd like to do is to reassess the density ranges for mixed-use development to make sure that's appropriate. But again, those would be future actions that will require amendments to our general plan. The ones that I'm proposing to you today are consistent with the general plan and are essentially quick fixes to remove the immediate barriers to mixed-use development. That concludes my report to you, and with that, I'd entertain any questions that you might have. This is a public hearing. I don't see anyone in the audience, but we probably need to open and close the public hearing regardless.
Questions of staff? Commissioner Song?
Glenn, on the, not the downtown areas, but the other mixed-use, multi-use areas, with this new density, with the general map, I believe, the general plan, I believe there's a 30-foot height reference. How would that work with this higher density?
Yeah, actually not in the general plan, but in the zoning code. There's typically a 30-foot height limit in those districts. And so that would remain in place, and mixed-use development would have to conform to that height limit. Oh. One of the things that we might want to look at is, do we want to increase that? And the question is, how far do we want to increase that? Height is such a sensitive topic here in Palm Springs that if we do look at that, I'd say going no more than 35 feet, 40 feet at the very maximum. But I'd be very cautious in terms of looking at that.
Yeah, I think it's very challenging to obtain that kind of density unless there's studios or SROs. It would be impossible to make it work with 30 feet. Mm-hmm. So it's almost like we're saying, here's the invitation, but then here's the cap. So it's contradicting.
Yeah, as part of the consideration of this ordinance today, if you want to look at raising that, that's certainly something that we could do as part of our recommendation to the City Council.
Well, hold on. Commissioner Gardner?
I just want to ask, can I ask a follow-up question of Maria?
Certainly. Go ahead, sir.
Because she's got the experience on this. In terms of the existing height limit, what kind of density could you, I mean, I know it's a little hypothetical, but what kind of density could you comfortably achieve in terms of number of dwelling units?
In the 20 to 30.
20 to 30 dwelling units per acre with a 30-foot cap. And a 30-foot cap is essentially 2 stories, right?
Right, because you always have to remember you have the parking requirement. So it's very expensive to build a parking structure in order to meet the parking requirements as well on the same site.
Thanks.
Commissioner Gardner?
I just have a couple of questions. The first is about the parking. So even though, I mean, ideally, we would have less cars in those downtown areas, we still have to drive everywhere else. I mean, people are not going to just stay in downtown. So can you just explain how the parking would work as in conjunction with the commercial? Would residents have a special parking pass? How would that work logistically to ensure that they always get a spot?
Yeah, we are not specifying in the ordinance that spaces have to be reserved specifically for the residential uses. We will leave that up to the individual applicants or property owners to determine. Typically, the market would want to have some type of a reserved space for residential units. And again, we'll leave that to the market. I think one of the things that is critical going back to the entitlement process for mixed-use development is because we are requiring a conditional use permit, one of the findings that we have to make is that parking will be adequate and sufficient. So if there are spaces reserved for the residential uses, we need to make sure that there's adequate parking for the commercial component as well. But again, I think one of the benefits of mixed-use development is you can take advantages of sharing parking spaces. So for example, while you might reserve a space for the residential occupants, guest parking can be accommodated within the commercial parking areas, for example. And so you're gaining greater efficiency in that regard.
Great.
Are there other questions? Commissioner Donenfeld?
Lynn, I understand wanting to bring the parking count down. And the way you describe our city is a little bit more urban than I think it is, although you might want to live in a more dense area like downtown. That car in Palm Springs, and as Grace said too, is so important. First of all, counting on that grocery store, first of all, we haven't approved the grocery store yet. Counting on it surviving and being an economic reality for a long time is a little bit iffy, I think, because we haven't had a grocery store downtown yet to see how it's going to take off. I'm just wondering, parking is just such a terrible problem for us to deal with in the more dense urban area of Palm Springs. If you feel comfortable that the 0.5 won't put us in a difficult spot when we're trying to review these applications.
Will it put us in a difficult spot? I don't necessarily think so. Again, as part of the conditional use permit process, we're looking at the sufficiency and how the uses work together. We're also looking at parking sufficiency as part of that analysis. If you are uncomfortable with doing the half space per unit in the central business district, then you might change the recommendation to 1 space per unit or what you feel comfortable with. In the same fashion, if you're uncomfortable with 1 space per unit in C1 and C2, your recommendation might be for 1.25 or 1.5. Again, I was just throwing those out there as things that we should probably have as a goal in terms of reducing the required parking for development. There's nothing that prohibits the applicant or property owner from developing more spaces than what is required. This is a minimum requirement.
What concerns me is if a developer is looking at a site and thinks he can get away with 0.5, that's exactly what he'll draw for. And then he'll come before us on a CUP. And when we start talking about increasing parking, he will have designed it in such a way that there's no way, unless you totally re-engineer the property, that you'll get that kind of parking number.
Yeah.
And they'll build to the lowest standards. So that would be my concern.
Yeah. Again, the parking figures that I put in there for the residential units is aspirational. If you feel uncomfortable with those, then we'd be happy to modify those accordingly.
I would just like to ask my other commissioners if they have any similar feelings as I do.
Let me do this. Let me just.
Oh, I'm sorry, Dan.
No, I'd rather, just so that we're clear, okay. I'd rather, if there are any more direct questions. Okay. Just because I have to open the public, I have to open and close the public hearing.
How does this proposal sort of marry with the affordable housing component bonuses and so forth?
Good question. Let's say, for example, that there was a mixed-use development that was coming in for approvals. As part of that, if they meet the qualifications for the density bonus under state law, which is also mirrored in our new ordinance going forward, relative to the affordability of the units, There's a minimum number of 5 units that they have to have in the development to qualify for it. Then they would also be able to apply for a density bonus as part of that. So for example, in the areas where the density is limited to 30 units to the acre, they could apply for a density bonus for the residential units, provided they meet all of the requirements relative to affordable housing and increase that by the percentage in our ordinance and in state law.
Then the limitation comes per Commissioner Song's comment about the height limitation, because she's saying you can't really achieve that unless.
Yeah.
Does the affordable housing component allow you to go higher?
The density bonus does allow for waivers of development standards in order to achieve the density. It's specific, I believe, to the residential component of that project. So yes, they would be able to have a waiver from our height limits, but we'd have to make a finding that it's reasonable.
And that would be ministerial?
Under the density bonus, yes, it could be ministerial. What I would suspect as part of a mixed-use project, because it has a commercial component, it would probably need to go before our Planning Commission as a discretionary review.
And I know this is hypothetical, but assuming you have that one-story commercial component facing the main artery, and then you have affordable housing component above that, but you said it only applies to the residential component. How would you?
So if it was done as a single development with commercial below and residential above, they would be able to apply for the waiver of the height limit because they're using it for the residential units.
Okay, I know this is all pretty hypothetical. But
it is. But those are good questions to ask. It would be able to work in conjunction with the density bonus.
What I'd like to do, just let me open the public hearing, just to formalize it. I see no one from the public. I'd like to close the public hearing at this point, and then just open it between dialogue between us and staff. Thanks. Thank you for that indulgence. Commissioner Gardner?
So I also had wanted to ask about low income and affordable housing. So is it possible within this ordinance to require that developments do a certain number of low income or affordable housing units?
Unfortunately not. What the city would need to do is adopt an inclusionary housing ordinance that could require affordable housing as part of mixed-use developments. But in and of this ordinance and the process that we're going through now, no, we wouldn't be able to do that. I will tell you that as part of the Plan Development District Ordinance update, we do have language relative to affordable housing as being one of the goals and allowing certain modifications of standards under that ordinance. But what the city really needs to do is get to some type of an inclusionary housing ordinance to be able to require that.
Commissioner Song?
I would like to express that this zoning doesn't necessarily mean housing. It could be condominiums, it could be hotels, it could be all kinds of type of housing. And, you know, with the advent of Lyft and taxis and rental cars and so on, that there is a creative way of transportation. And my view of trying to have a developer come up with the creativity of building anything higher in the 50, 40, units per acre, in addition to the mixed-use component and the downtown component. I think in this sort of creative way of how do we house more people or how do we bring more people to Palm Springs, if that's what's desired, I think this would be one of those type of projects in which 0.5 per unit should be seriously considered, especially in the downtown corridor. As you know, you lived in beautiful metropolitan cities, and the developers sometimes charge more for having a parking space, and those who don't want to have a parking space, then they get to find on their own where they're going to find their parking space. But that encourages mobility, creativity, and so I think our way of being used to how we park should be maybe reconsidered, especially when it comes to the downtown area, knowing that it's not even the entire street, it's really 3 zones.
If I can add, I'm more in line with Commissioner Donnenfeld. I've done many mixed-use projects, and most of those mixed-use projects I've done are in an urban core. I really don't feel we're an urban core at this point to allow 0.5. I'm leaning towards towards 1. Just by the simple fact that our headways for our busing system is really poor at this point, especially through downtown Palm Springs. And as was mentioned, our grocery stores are not nearby, and that's carrying stuff. And although there is Lyft and Uber, there is a cost to Lyft and Uber. I do, however, with Commissioner Song, I believe in creativity. I just don't know as we're ready to go down to 0.1. And I'm more, or 0.5, excuse me. And I'm leaning more towards 1 for the urban core. Or for both, for the C1 as well. That would be a reduction, just going to 1 in the commercial zone.
I'm familiar with parking requirements, residential parking requirements tagged to number of bedrooms. And so now we're saying a 1-bedroom unit has the same parking requirement as a 3-bedroom unit? Yeah.
Only under the mixed-use development standards. So if it's a standalone multifamily project, it's still subject to our regular parking requirements based on the number of bedrooms.
But I mean, I'd be willing to look at something maybe 0.5 1-bedroom, 1 2-bedroom, 1.5 3-bedroom, because I think that would more accurately respond to demand.
What about your commercial use, though?
Well, that's a whole separate thing. That's right. That's the commercial part of it.
Yeah, they have to provide parking for both the residential and the commercial, and we have standards for the commercial that are already established.
I think tagging it to the number of bedrooms would more accurately capture the requirements of that particular unit than just saying 1 or half of 1 per unit, regardless of the number of bedrooms.
Well, going back to what Maria's saying from an economic standpoint, you're getting an even more expensive project than if you're...
Well, it depends how many bedrooms a unit has.
Right.
If they're all 1-bedrooms, then you're back to a half a unit, half a space per unit.
But if
it's all 3 bedrooms, then it's 1.5 per unit.
Could I
Commissioner Song?
Yes. I know this is there's an assembly bill for actually affordable housing in which it ties into 0.5 per bedroom. So you're right. It shouldn't award the same ratio to the number of bedrooms because you're correct. If it is 1 space for 4 bedrooms, that's just, right? That's just a headache that's going to weigh us all. So I think the fact that it's tied into a bedroom, you're right. Then the number of people and the possible uses could be tied to the bedrooms. So if it is 1 bedroom or a studio will be 0.5, or also you can go to 0.75. Yeah, and then we can tie it into the bedrooms. So it is a proportional ratio.
Is this something that we might be able to do to pencil out right here, or is it something that staff wants to think more in depth about?
We're under a bit of a time crunch.
Okay, that's fine.
I like the suggestion. I think Commissioner Hirschbein and Commissioner Song have both come up with good suggestions in terms of changes. I think both of them are fairly aligned in that requiring 0.5 spaces per bedroom is an easy formula and something that's very manageable. Exactly. So 0.5 spaces per bedroom, I think, would be a good standard. The alternative, Chair Woods, as you suggested, is just going to a 1 per unit in both the CBD and C1, C2. That's another option for you. I think either one would be acceptable in terms of the direction that you might go.
More discussion? Commissioner Gardner?
Along those lines, I think that what you mentioned earlier about wanting to create a space that allows for people to, this area to be a walkable city and things like that, we kind of have to go the way of creating that. And so it is a bit of a catch-22 at first because I agree we're not there yet. But I think if we do figure out creative solutions, I like that 0.5 per bedroom. I think that's helpful, but it will kind of push us in that direction of becoming a greener city and putting pressure on the bus line, for instance, and council to do other things to help create that. So I like this.
It also
idea.
reduces the cost to the developer, which encourages development then.
Okay. With that, do I hear a motion on the floor?
Commissioner Hirschbein, your microphone, please.
Okay, I will move that we adopt the proposed zoning change and recommend it to council per staff with the following change, that the parking requirement in the CBD be changed to half a parking space per bedroom, up to 1.5 parking spaces maximum. And then I need some guidance on the other piece of it, the part that's out of the CBD, the C1, C2.
C1 and C2.
Maybe we'd use the same.
Okay.
I think
Yeah.
so.
Okay. The same.
And
All
what
right.
about downtown? Downtown, there's three
Yeah,
zones.
that's throughout both areas.
This is for, as I now understand it, residential, not commercial.
Well, the commercial's on top
So,
of it.
right.
Correct.
Yeah.
Right. But you said it's for residential that you're
Yes.
making, yep.
Is there a second to the motion? Okay, a second has been made. Can we vote? It passes unanimously. Thank you. I'm waiting for the applause. Okay, now it's time for Planning Commission report, request, and comments, and I will look to our director for that. Excuse me, to the Planning Commission first, and then the director. Commissioner Donenfeld.
Mr. Marucci and I were talking, Flynn, earlier about the fact that you're creating a task force to work on the first phase of amending the general plan. And I would assume you're going to be picking, in addition to other members from the Planning Commission to serve on that. Is that correct?
That would be correct, yes.
Okay, good. That was my question. And secondly, I just want to congratulate our new chairman for conducting a wonderful meeting.
Yes, impressive.
Very happy until he comes down on our heads for something we did badly. But right now, we're very happy, Dennis.
Thank you, Don. Commissioner Hirschbein?
Yeah, Planning Director Flynn. So while you were out of the room, we were discussing projects that have not seen the light of day that we've approved, and one of them that came up was the Regal Theater redevelopment. Any update on that?
I believe that they have submitted for building permits, but they have not been issued yet.
And they've submitted a while ago, or?
Yes, they were submitted a while ago, but they haven't pulled the permit.
So, okay, so it's ready to be pulled, do we think?
I believe so.
So them not pulling it might indicate lack of
financing.
Yes. And what is the entitlement time limitation on that?
That one was 2 years.
From when, do we know?
I don't know off the top of my head when we approved that project.
And 2 years till what?
2 years to pull a building permit and start construction.
Okay.
So that's the requirement relative to the project.
All right. I'd be interested in knowing that date. I'll just put it on my calendar and circle it. And then also, Commissioner Hudson and I had some back and forth comments that were forwarded onto the grocery outlet applicant, and I was wondering what the status of that was.
The status of grocery outlet is that, long story short, the minor architectural application is not required to be approved by the Planning Commission. There was a legal challenge to that, and so we've been directed to process that administratively. We are meeting with them, let's see, I believe tomorrow, to go over the recommendations of the Planning Commission and to see if we can still implement those. So those recommendations, we will still work with the applicant to make sure that they're implemented, but the item will not be coming back for a vote of the Planning Commission.
So can you just explain to us how or why we were involved initially then?
We brought it to you because we like to bring forth the applications where we have a conditional use permit and a minor architectural application. We like to bring those to you together so you can see the entire project. We like the professional review and opinion of our Planning Commission in projects. We like having your expertise on projects where we can do so.
So is a conditional use permit approved by the commission still required?
Yes, and you already had approved the conditional use permit.
Subject to something, right?
I don't know if you had any limitations on the hours and some other things.
Oh, so the conditional use permit was approved, but the minor architectural was not. And now you're saying that's not necessary.
And it's actually not necessary by the Planning Commission.
Commissioner Maruzzi.
Yeah, just how many planning commissioners are we going to have on the task force for the general plan update?
I would imagine we would probably have no more than 2.
Is that typical?
Excuse me?
Is that typical?
Yes, it is. It is. We have to avoid Brown Act violations, number 1. And then also, in order to keep the stakeholders group manageable, we like to keep it to a number under 10 if we can. And we also have other representatives that we need to include from neighborhood groups, et cetera.
We had 3, though, on the golf course conversion.
We did slightly different type of a subcommittee there in that it was only made up of members of the Planning Commission. The General Plan Steering Committee will also be made up by members of the public. We may have a representative of the AAC on that as well. So again, it's looking at having additional members from the community participating in that.
Will the planning commissioners on that task force have any greater authority, input, or is it all equal?
It would all be equal.
I see. Okay, thank you.
Okay, hearing no more comments, Commissioner Song?
Just as a newbie, and I know it's not going to be a few more meetings than now, but is there any way to bring up the temperature in the chamber?
Be a gray sweater.
Okay, preaching to the choir. All right. Well, I see you guys.
Just a couple of things, Mr. Chair, before we dismiss here today. Let me just go into some additional detail about the general plan update. I'm working on the RFP to get that out. We currently have $400,000 in our budget to start that process. We will need some additional funding. City Council has committed that in the coming budget discussions, they will include some additional funding for that. Once we are ready to move forward with the RFP, the City Council will most likely appoint a steering committee for the general plan. As we've discussed, my recommendation would be that we have representatives from our Planning Commission in addition to representatives from the community. And so that's, excuse me? Again, I want to keep it under 10. It needs to be a manageable group so that we can have regular meetings and that it doesn't get to be so large that participation becomes unmanageable. So I would recommend that we keep it relatively small. Secondly, one of the things that I would like to do is to have a training session, a joint training session with the Architectural Advisory Committee. You all need a break from study sessions, and so I don't want to do it at your next meeting. What I would like to do, I believe, let's see, February 27th is our second meeting in February, and so I'd like to hold the training session on that day, again, so that you have a break from study sessions, at least for the first meeting in February. So if you would put that date on your calendars, February the 27th, we would probably start that about 10:30, I think, either 10:30 or 11.
What type of training?
Excuse me?
What type of training?
We'll be going over findings, how to make findings relative to applications. We'll go over the distinction and the duties between the Planning Commission and the Architectural Advisory Committee, and then we'll be looking at the criteria for architectural review. It's going to be a review for some of you who've been there before, but we do have some new members from both groups who would benefit from that training. And that concludes my comments to you.
With that, do I have a motion to adjourn? Moved, seconded, all in favor? We're adjourned. Thank you again to our two new commissioners for the first meeting. Congratulations.